Last one, just here, Mary Jo, just last one, just here.
Okay. Mary McAleese contributed a wonderful foreword to the book, and in it she describes events of her own early life, which led to, as she said, the dedication of the years to come to the vision and values of Daniel O'Connell, and I can't think of anybody more appropriate to launch Children of the Troubles. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary McAleese.
It's a joy to see so many people here tonight, and a privilege to have been asked to launch this remarkable book, for which I thank Joe and Freya. I was 18 in August of 1969, do not do the maths. And the A-level results had just been published, and so I knew that I was about to go to university, and our Dublin-born parish priest took myself and my friend Eileen Gilmartin, both of us children of men from the west of Ireland, my father from Roscommon, hers from Sligo, and we lived beside each other, and now all of a sudden both of us were going to be university students. And our parish priest took us out to dinner to celebrate. Why? Because ours was a parish, the parish of Ardoyne, which many of you will know the name of. It had 70% unemployment, and so there was hope in the bright futures that seemed to stretch out in front of Eileen and I that night. We set off for a place called the Woodburn House Hotel at 7 o'clock, and while we were gone, our parish was invaded, and the genie of sectarian violence was well and truly out of the bottle by the time we got to dessert. 1969, people were planning to travel to the moon. Northern Ireland was being dragged back into a vortex of violence that spread like a Mexican wave in that fateful August and on that fateful night in Ardoyne. Loyalist gangs backed by police officers in uniform attacked Catholic homes. 30 homes were burnt that night. And so we arrived back, Eileen and a man called Father Honorius Kelly, the uncle of Father Frank Kelly, or Frank Kelly, who acted as Father Jack, who often said that he based, I won't go any further. Anyway, we arrived back to Bedlam, and honestly it was a scene straight out of Dante's Inferno. Next morning, as we walked through the debris, the place was alive with stories of the events of the night before, and one of those stories has stayed with me, always stayed with me. It's a story of a young woman called Alice, young married woman. She was pregnant, and at the door of her house in the lower part of Old Ardoyne, one of the streets that was most badly devastated that night, Hooker Street, she was beaten by a uniformed police officer at her own front door. She miscarried that baby. That was the same night that a short distance away, a young fellow called Patrick Rooney, aged 9, safe in his own house, you would have thought, in Divis Flats, he was shot in the head by police, who later, of course, denied that they had fired the lethal bullets. And this is one of the saddest things about many of these children's deaths, is that so often they were accompanied by an impenetrable tissue of lies, whether from officialdom or from paramilitaries, that can only have added just layer upon layer of distress to their families. Patrick's story is the first story in Joe and Freya's book, this tragic and terrible series of stories of children who were victims of the Troubles. They're stories that absolutely need to be told and retold and remembered and re-remembered, but honestly, dear God, it is just so hard to read them. For the savage deaths of these overlooked children let loose miseries that accompanied those who loved them for the rest of their lives. Miseries that changed the course of history, mostly not for the better, but occasionally, miraculously, they provoked the truth and the human solidarity that alone feeds decent, egalitarian societies. The loss of Alice's unborn baby, it wasn't the end of her story either. 4 years later, her husband was shot standing in his front garden by soldiers who would later claim falsely that he was armed. Patrick's aunt and cousin were murdered by loyalists several years later. So, to talk of closure when confronted by these stories is honestly meaningless. At least 186 children from families of all politics, religions and backgrounds died violent deaths on this island and in Great Britain, thanks to the catalogue of failures of adults who could have, should have, turned the tide of history's lethal hatreds, but didn't do so in time to prevent the waste of these little lives. Often it was the sheer incomprehension and grief of their parents and their families that forced people out of their separate bunkers and allowed us to glimpse the common humanity that eventually was forged into a peace process. I mean, who could forget the avalanche of shared grief for the deaths of Stephen Parker or Maria McGurk, killed along with her mother in McGurk's bar, great friends of my father's, the three Maguire children, Tim Parry, Magella O'Hare, all little children, little innocent children, full of wonder and full of life and doing such simple everyday things when the toxins of a history they didn't create and they didn't understand poured its acid rain on their little lives and disintegrated those beautiful lives. We thought, in our innocence too, that each child's death would change things, that it would soften hardened hearts, that it would never be forgotten. But life went on inexorably, and these little lives, these lovely lives, were consigned to the recesses of memory, except by those who had to face their absence night and day ever since. 50 years of killing children. Children killed by paramilitaries, by uniformed police and army, by thugs, by so-called accident, by design, overlooked collateral damage as so often children are. Joel and Freya have honoured them in a very special way. They've respected them and they've loved them deeply in this book. It's a really hard read, but we need to read it to remind ourselves over and over and over again of the outrageous cost of this peace that we enjoy. It is priceless because their lives are priceless. It is vulnerable as their lives were vulnerable, and we have to protect it, we have to defend it for them and for the innocent children of today and tomorrow who are entitled to have their lives sustained by peace and not interrupted permanently by the death culture of conflict. There's another story, of course, not told in the book, but one day, someday, I hope will be told. There's a book called Lost Lives. Many of you will know that book also. It lists all those who died in the Troubles, almost 4,000 of them. It gives the briefest details about them. Civilian, Catholic undertaker, married, 9 children. Civilian, Protestant, aircraft inspector, married, 1 child. Civilian, Protestant, cleaner, married, 2 children. Civilian, Hindu, married, 3 children. Civilian doctor, married, 3 children. Protestant police officer, married, 1 child. Soldier, married, 2 children. There are, like I say, almost 4,000 entries, and many of those who died left behind bewildered and bereft children. I think in a special way of the little daughter of Olive McConnell. She lived, the child lived, but her mother died in a loyalist car bomb that was designed to kill my father in October of 1972. It didn't kill him, but like so many people who experienced death in their hands, on their doorsteps, he entered a period of catatonic depression, which also impacted his 9 children. We think of all of those people tonight and hope that in this powerful telling of the stories of the children who died, the bereaved children who lived with grief, the bereaved parents and siblings who lived with unquenchable loss, we hope that the powerful telling of these stories will help them know that their pain and the craven waste of days that could have been and should have been happy, that is the fuel now that powers us to preserve the peace, to insist on fidelity to the Good Friday Agreement with its founding principle of parity of esteem. So that's what Joe and Freya have done. They've flooded our thinking again with a reminder of what this peace cost, a reminder of what we owe these children, a debt that is never, ever going to be repaid. So to you both, to Joe and to Freya, well done. If ever there was a labour of love, this is it. And if ever, God knows, there was a timely telling of it, this is it.
After Grooney was killed 50 years ago in 1969, the last, Michael McClements, died in 2006, more than 3 decades later. We know from talking to so many of you that while their loss is always with you, their parents and siblings, their wider family circle, their friends and their communities, all too often their names have been publicly forgotten.
Children died in their homes, or at play, or at work. They died in their prams, or on their way to the shop, or while fighting. They died because of childish curiosity, or because of unexpected circumstance, or simply because violence had come to the streets where they lived. We are deeply grateful to you, the families, above all, for placing your trust in us. These are your children, your memories, and this is your book.
In Children of the Troubles we tell their stories, the stories of baby Jacqueline and Anne-Marie O'Brien, killed 500 yards from here at the top of O'Connell Street. They loved the swings. In Children of the Troubles we tell the stories of baby Jacqueline and Anne-Marie O'Brien. They loved the swings at Mountjoy Square and who perished along with their parents, John and Anna. Between those 4 people they had spent less than 46 years on God's earth when they were murdered at the top of this street by loyalist paramilitary. The story of Geraldine O'Reilly, who loved going to the chipper in Belturbet with her brother who's here tonight. The story of Master Pat Stanley, his family are here tonight as well, killed in the same. What was Master Pat Stanley from Clara, County Offaly doing in Belturbet 3 days after Christmas that year? You know what he was doing? He was a brilliant sportsman. He got some things for Christmas and he didn't get a pair of football boots, so when the opportunity came up to get some extra money and the local van was making deliveries, he jumped on the local van and he ended up that night, the last delivery was in Belturbet and the shop wasn't open. He had to stay the night in Belturbet. He went into a phone box to ring his mammy to say, "Mammy, I won't be home." And he wasn't. He was killed in that phone box. And Geraldine O'Reilly was killed in the chipper where she was buying the chips. The story of Oran Doherty, who saw how happy his mother was when the Good Friday Agreement was signed in 1998. He was a curious child. He asked her why, and she told him she was happy because it meant nobody else would be killed in Northern Ireland. He was killed 5 months later in Omagh. We are deeply conscious that every single day of the year, at least 10 families are marking the anniversary deaths of loved ones because of the conflict. I remembered the Dublin families. I also want to remember baby Doherty on the memorial down there at the bottom of Talbot Street. Colette and John, their parents. Colette went up to the rotunda at the top of the street on that awful Friday, May the 17th, 1974, and she had Wendy with her 2-year-old daughter, and the staff in the rotunda said, "Colette, you go straight home and come straight back, you're going to have your baby today." She walked home, took her time, as they always do in Dublin, took her time, went down Talbot Street. Colette was murdered, and baby Doherty was murdered on the day he was due to be born. Wendy survived, found rambling around the streets, not knowing what had happened. But we hope we have done the memories of all the children justice. Thank you. Go